Remember Matthew 5, 30 through 39, 40? Jesus is talking to Pharisees and he says, you study the scriptures thoroughly because you think in them you find life. But it's these very scriptures that testify about me, and you Pharisees are unwilling to come to me that you may have life. So one of my big picture goals is to always allow the Word of God to take me to the person of God, all right? So anyway, that's how we're going there. This is who we are also, if you're visiting. We value God and His Word. Just made a comment about that. We love grace and forgiveness, and I appreciate the grace that you grant me and we grant each other. We want to engage and impact. At the end of today's service, we're going to have a little kickoff for the missions team, short-term missions team going to Alaska. Pastor Lonnie right now is in Africa, and so we have a group of people, many of you, going here and there and everywhere. So we love engaging and impacting the world, and obviously growing in healthy relationships. So kind of where we are, what we're doing. And so a couple weeks ago we had Easter. I preached on the resurrection, kind of a big deal, and then we took a look at Matthew. Matthew was a penny pincher. And because of his impact with Jesus, he turned into a person of prayer. And that's kind of a big deal, right? And so today we're going to be taking a look at Peter. Peter moves from somebody who is ashamed of Jesus to somebody who is assertive, bold. Peter, he just, let's go. Ready, fire, aim, okay? So that's Peter. And so today we're going to be looking at Peter and understanding that before the resurrection, Peter was ashamed. A middle school girl shut him down, right? He's doing his thing, and he follows Jesus. Part of the reason Peter and most of the disciples followed Jesus early on is they thought that the Messiah was going to overthrow Rome, a king, power, free bread, all this kind of stuff. And slowly they get the sense that, well, I don't think Jesus is on the same page as we are, all right? And one of my favorite little stories is when, I might mention this later, but it just came to my mind. I think it's Luke 9. They're running around. They go through a Samaritan village, and the Samaritans do not welcome Jesus and his disciples. So James and John, they're called the sons of thunder, which tells you they probably got in trouble a lot, okay? Anyway, James and John say to Jesus, because they didn't welcome them, should we call down thunder on them and kill them? And I'm like, can you imagine the look on Jesus' face? It's like, how long have I been with you? I mean, killing people because they don't say hi is not my agenda. Anyway, so the point is, before the resurrection, Peter was ashamed, and he kind of wanted that military Messiah until that guy Jesus is getting arrested and the heat turns up, and then a middle school girl says, hey, don't you know him? Weren't you with him? And then Peter's like, yeah, I'm not so much. What? I don't know really what you're talking about. And so we're going to see following Jesus has a cost, but when you encounter the person of Jesus, boom, it changes your life. And that's why he goes to Assertive, and here's a great verse. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. This is Paul. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God. Look at the connection, ashamed and power. Power takes care of ashamed. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, the Jew first and also the Greek. And now, this is another fun verse. This is the assertive side of Peter. And look, it's the book of Acts. So this is after Jesus came, lived, died, resurrected, and then ascended. And so in the book of Acts, Peter doing his thing, preaching boldly, and it says, now they saw the boldness of Peter and John, and they perceived they were uneducated common men. Okay, stop right there. It's not hard to figure out that Peter isn't that smart. You just look and talk to him and like, oh yeah, he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. They perceived that. But they were astonished because of their boldness. And they recognized this is their answer. They recognized, oh, well, they've been with Jesus. Now, to them, that might be a social derogatory attack. I think it's more of a life change explanation. Oh, well, he's been with Jesus. Love that, okay? So, this is the assertive Peter, all right? Because he's experienced the power of the gospel. So, before we get into this, I want to point out that the Gospel of Mark is really the Gospel of Peter. I don't know if you're kind of run into this before. I know some of you study a lot of stuff. It's great. But a lot of church historians very clearly, early on in history, say that Peter gave his account to John Mark, who wrote it down. John Mark is not an apostle. He's not a disciple. Didn't hang out with Jesus. Peter did. That's one of the reasons why the Gospel of Mark starts off no genealogy, because Peter just jumps in when Jesus is an adult. Peter starts his gospel, Jesus came from Nazareth, went to the wilderness, did this, he was baptized, so just boom, starts, okay? That's because Peter intersects with Jesus when Jesus is an adult. Anyway, that won't be on the quiz at the end, but just thought I'd mention it. All right, we're going to take a little timeline look through Peter's life, and he's born maybe 1 BC, and then born in Bethsaida, about 25 to 27, the year 25 to 27. He is married, so Peter is married. He has kids, lives in Capernaum. And then around AD 30, meets Jesus, and Jesus says, "Follow me." And this is where the story gets kind of interesting. All right? So I'm going to go to Matthew 4, and read a couple passages here, a couple verses. Got some up here. Yeah, I'm going to read out of this here, Matthew 4:18. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, because they're fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother. Those are the guys that were called the sons of thunder. Anyway, in the boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets, he called to them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. So this is somewhat unusual behavior. Why some random rabbi dude shows up and says, "Hey, follow me," and they just leave their business, leave everything. Like, what, Dad, what, hey, sons, what are you doing? Okay, I got to take some time here and explain this, because Zebedee would be thrilled that his sons would leave the family business because a rabbi is calling them. I got to explain this, so just hang with me here. Going to go academic a little bit, all right? The stages of Hebrew education. The first stage is called Bet Sephar, ages 6 to 10. Seriously, they would memorize the Torah. Jewish people took pride in the education of their kids. One rabbi says, from 6 to 10, we stuff them with Torah. It's just stuff, memorize, okay? They don't have Nintendo, they don't have Netflix, so they're just reciting and memorizing and reciting and memorizing. And then the next stage after that, when kids were about 10 to 14 years old, they, Daniel, Psalms, the writings, they would memorize those. Now, this isn't so much literal word-for-word memorizing, but they can tell you everything about it. This is the stage when they start to do Q&A, question and answer training. So, theologically, the equivalent of, well, what's 2 plus 2? Well, they wouldn't just say 4. They would say, what's 25% of 16? Showing you that they understand the answer, but also how to phrase another question. So it's just a dialogue, okay? What does a suffering servant in Isaiah 53 do this here? And then I'll ask another question. So they just question and question and question. This is the stage that Jesus got left in Jerusalem, and his parents are like, oh, and they go, and Jesus is in the temple doing this, Q&A. And they're amazed at his understanding, okay? So that's fascinating. So questions and answers. And then you get to Bet Midrash, about ages 14 to 17. And this is called they studied the oral and the written law. And everybody knows what the word says. Where they differ is the interpretations. Every rabbi had his own unique style and method of interpretation. And so here they start to argue about which rabbi has a better interpretation. And so-and-so says on the Sabbath you can walk this far. Well, this rabbi says that if you're going to go that far and then go to a synagogue, you can also do that and know that. So they get into these heated debates about interpretation, okay? Now that's leading someplace, because after you study different interpretive models, you figure out which rabbi you want to follow. And when you choose a rabbi, you are signing on to an entire universe of expectations and interpretive guidelines that will define the rest of your life. So you better be careful which rabbi you choose. But you choose him, and then he may not accept you, okay? Some rabbis, and that there's different schools of thought in the first century. When we read the New Testament and Jesus runs into a positive encounter with a Pharisee, that Pharisee was probably from the school of Hillel, very open-minded and liberal. So Nicodemus, probably from that because he's like, hey, I don't understand, but the whole thing about born again, he's open to that. Other Pharisees from a different school called Shammai, very strict. Get Jesus out of here. He's not doing anything helpful. So anyway, that's just a background of that. So, but you had to choose your rabbi carefully, because that's going to shape the rest of your life. So you go up to this rabbi and you say, hey, I want to be your disciple. Now the rabbi doesn't want a bunch of schmucks following him around that don't know God's word. So he's going to test and push and test. He will say, give me in the book of Habakkuk all 4 references to Deuteronomy in order. And you boom, boom, boom. You just know that. And on and on and on. And so, it's kind of like a funnel. And pretty soon you're down to a couple people that can hang with you. And if you can hang with the rabbi after all that testing, then you enter the yeshiva experience, like a college seminary experience, okay? And the rabbi would say, follow me. After you've proven yourself, after you have performed, you see where I'm going with this? After you have measured up and showed your worthiness, then he says, follow me. Now, a couple weeks ago, we talked about believe, behave, belong. Remember that? And Jesus is totally different. Jesus shows up and says, hey, Matthew, you haven't performed. In fact, you are actively being a crooked thief, tax gatherer, and I ask you to belong. And so Jesus is turning this whole thing up on its head, right? But the rabbi, if he's satisfied with this person, he'd say, take my yoke upon you. Follow me. They had this phrase saying, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. He's just following around. You would leave home, happily leave home. And this is why Zebedee would be like, guess why I'm fishing alone? My son's got called by a rabbi. It's a great honor, right? Okay, so that would be a big deal. Not everybody made the cut. Obviously, this is kind of a crazy path, but that's the path that they were going on. All right. So in the Gospels, when we read follow me, it is an idiom that means come, be with me, be like me, take every part of what I think, live and do, and mimic that. It's not just, oh, he's going from point A to point B. I'll meet you there at 3. No, it's your whole life is devoted to your rabbi. And as I said, they would leave home joyfully because of what's going on. So I mentioned this already, but a particular rabbi's interpretation, his style, whether it's liberal or conservative or maybe focused on ceremonial ritual laws, every rabbi has his own little thing, and you would adhere to that if you choose him. And so that's called his yoke. And so Jesus, in that culture, that crazy culture, says, my yoke is easy, because no other rabbi had an easy yoke. I love some of these things. Okay, on the Sabbath, seriously, this was a legitimate rule some Pharisees had. You could not spit on the Sabbath, because the spit hits the ground and some dust could move, and that could be construed as plowing on the Sabbath. I'm not making this up. You can Google it if you want, because if it's true, if it's a Google. Anyway, seriously, it's true. And another one, if your house is on fire, you cannot pick stuff up and leave on the Sabbath, because that's work. However, you could put on as many clothes as you could put on and walk out like the kid on Christmas Story. Remember him, the little kid? He couldn't, anyway, he falls down. I always think of that when I think. But these rules are burdening people. And that's why Jesus, now what's your mental image of Jesus? I don't know, but this is what Jesus says to the Pharisees. When you make a convert, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. Apparently Jesus hasn't read How to Win Friends and Influence People. We'll give him a pass because he's God, okay? But anyway, you see what I'm saying? This is interesting. My yoke is easy. He stands in complete contrast in that culture. Jesus is the one going out and picking disciples. Normally, the disciple wannabe picks the rabbi, all right? Fascinating, okay? So, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. And even then, during this phase, as they're following him, it's entirely possible the rabbi just rejects him. It's like, you know what, after a year and a half with you, you're just not getting it. So, go and do your trade. Go do your family business. You guys make pottery, right? Over there in Capernaum, or you're a fisherman. Just go and fish, because this it's just not going to happen. All right. So that's a possible path. So here's the path of becoming a disciple. You have to sail through all stages of Hebrew education. Choose your rabbi. Memorize his interpretation of everything. Ask him if you could be his disciple, and he says yes. Then you take his yoke and you follow him. He says no. You go and do some business, whatever your family business is, okay? Fishing, building, or whatever, okay? So that takes us to this passage that we've already read. Now, Peter, I'm going to go backwards one, hang on. Peter knows nothing of this, right? He is not worthy. He hasn't passed through this. At some point, well, I'm going to get ahead of myself, so we'll hang on, okay? Why are they fishermen? Because they got kicked out of the system. They couldn't memorize Deuteronomy. It's just, go fish. I can just see the writing on the wall here. And, you don't even know what that means, do you? Because that's in Daniel. Okay, sorry, anyway, it's kind of... So they would kick them out and say, just go fish. They're fishermen because they've been rejected. All right? That's huge. So that explains why Jesus, he says, come follow me. They're like, yeah, we can be a